Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today I want to look at a wine that is currently the most popular, the most searched for Pinot Gris on the Wine Searcher website. I don't just mean Pinot Gris, I'm also including Pinot Grigio, and this wine is from Domaine Zind Humbrecht. It's from a Grand Cru called Rangen de Thann, but particularly it's from a Cru Clos and Urbain, and we have the 2015 vintage of this to try today. Now, the Humbrecht family traced their heritage as grape growers in Alsace back to 1620, but the current domain wasn't founded until 1959 with the marriage of Leonard Humbrecht to Genevieve Zind, and the domain combined the winemaking interests of two long-standing Alsace grape growing and winemaking families. Leonard was always very quality oriented and set about trying to ensure that the domain was making the best wines possible. One of the ways in which he did this was in 1977. He purchased the 5.5 hectare Clos and Urbain vineyard, a clos within the Rangen de Thann vineyard. And at the time he purchased it, the vineyard had pretty much been abandoned, and he had to work incredibly hard to restore this steep vineyard with its volcanic soils to make sure that retaining walls were repaired. The reason this vineyard had been abandoned was that it was such hard work to manage. And yet this is a vineyard where there are references from the Abbey at Murbach saying that this hillside was completely planted with vines as long ago as that. This exceptional south-facing vineyard sits near the town of Thann, with the river Thur running beside its bottom border. The vineyard wasn't actually classified as Grand Cru until 1983, but in its entirety it comprises 18.8 hectares, with the Clos and Urbain being 5.5 hectares at the western end near the town. As an indication of the amount of work that had to go on at the time when people like Leonard Humbrecht and Bernard Schoffit stepped in to try and revitalise Rangen de Thann, there were probably only 4 hectares of vines still being worked on the vineyard, and these were all in the bottom portion of the vineyard. Today, Domaine Zind Humbrecht is run by Leonard and Genevieve's son, Olivier, with his wife Margaret, and Olivier was the first Frenchman to pass the Master of Wine qualification. The domain has been farmed organically and biodynamically since the late 1990s. I think they did their first organic and biodynamic trials in 1997, and they've been certified by EcoCert since the year 2000 and by Biodivan since 2002. Since 2005 they've used a horse named Nikita, to plough in their vineyards. The vines from which this wine is made were 52 years old in 2015, and densely planted on these steep volcanic slopes. Yields were restricted to 23 hectolitres per hectare. The volcanic soils are very free draining, and that gives great concentration to the wines. Also, the proximity to the river Thur means that normally there's a small proportion of botrytis in the harvest. In 2015 this was particularly small, but that's what accounts for much of the richness of the wine and the fact there's residual sugar remaining in it at the end of fermentation. Picking is done entirely by hand on such a steep vineyard. It would be impossible to use a machine harvester even if you wanted to. Pressing is done very slowly using a pneumatic press to ensure there's clean juice and to make sure that grapes aren't treated harshly and giving bitterness. Fermentation is done entirely with the indigenous yeasts that have made their way into the winery on the fruit, and my understanding is the fermentation vessels used are large seasoned oak foudre, so oak ovals, and that these are fitted with temperature control. The Humbrechts are very happy to let the yeasts work at their own pace. Evidently fermentation for this wine took 6 months, although many of their fermentations will take longer than that. This wine finished medium sweet. The notes I have tell me that there are 32.7 grams per litre of sugar remaining in the wine. Olivier Humbrecht normally allows his wines to age with the fine lees and up until bottling, but in the case of this particular wine he felt that longer time was needed, so the wine wasn't actually bottled until February 2017, giving time for the yeast to break down and impart extra fatness and richness to the wine. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? Firstly, the colour is a lovely mature medium to deep, almost bronzed yellow. Swelling it, as I say, the wine has just over 30 grams of sugar, and its label says it has 13% alcohol. It's clinging to the side of the glass. I think it will eventually, there we go, it's forming some tears there, but it's not doing so particularly readily. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are sweet, almost a rich appley fruit, almost like a sort of a rich cooked apple and cream. And yet there's a lovely lifted floral, almost vanilla-like perfume to the wine, almost like a sort of a sweet lily perfume. There's something very high toned, very pungent about it. So let's have a taste. On the palate, the wine is dense, there's an immediate sweetness, there are honeyed notes, there's rich bruised apple, cooked pear, notes like that, and yet there's a slightly sort of creamy, almost cheesy umami note on the mid palate. There's a pear-like texture, there's a slight tannic structure to this. It's not harsh, but it's giving weight to the mid palate. The alcohol's beautifully balanced, and there is a good freshness that's lifting it. It's almost like a sort of a cooked apple. There are toffee apple notes, and this rich sort of lily-like, vanilla-like, almost sort of sickly sort of sweet spice perfume running through there. The wine is hedonistic with its sort of medium sweetness, its rich texture, and there are these sort of sweet perfumes, and as the wine develops they're sort of starting to show sweet perfumes, just hints of ginger and things like that. The acidity is giving good length, but actually there's a sort of honeyed richness opening out on the finish that's giving a bit more breadth and weight. I'm talking about floral notes like lilies. I think maybe I should have mentioned honeysuckle. But if you think of that sort of heady perfume on a summer evening, that's the sort of note you have here. Something very vivid and amazingly beautiful. The flavours are persistent, but given the wine's weight and richness, I wonder if they may open out further. The wine's weight, its medium sweet honeyed nature, and its good acidity all make me think that this is a wine that would pair beautifully with white meats, cold meats, cheeses, an array of charcuterie, that sort of thing. I don't think it's got the sweetness to be paired with sweet desserts, but if you had a cheese board with dried fruits, things like figs, apricots, etc., this would provide a lovely backdrop to taste those sort of things against. I think this is a wine that shows the wonderful aromatics that Pinot Gris can potentially have. But despite its richness and its fullness, the wine's acidity and its beautiful perfumes give it some real elegance. The Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine comes out at 95 out of 100. And I think that's a very fair score. I think there are only a handful of Pinot Gris that reach this sort of quality. And I have really enjoyed the opportunity to taste this one. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you found the tasting of interest. Do please press the like button. If you would like to watch more of our videos, do please sign up and follow us on YouTube. It would be fantastic to have your subscription. And that way you can also set up an alert so you can be notified every time we publish a new tasting. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. It would be fantastic to have your endorsement in that way. If you have any comments, please leave those in the comments box below. We'd love to hear from you about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. I will of course leave a link in the box below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, and there you can see the wine's price, its availability in your market. You can also use the tabs on that page to find out more about the winemaking, the producer, the region, the grape variety. You can look at critics' reviews, other users' reviews. You can see a price history, and there's a vintage comparison table. So hopefully there's everything anybody would need to make an informed decision about buying this wine. So thank you again for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Until then, bye for now.